Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Test Management in an Agile Reality, sponsored by Perforce. I'm Jenna Sargent, news editor at SD Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the sdtimes.com website about 24 hours after the event. Second, if at any time you have questions about or during the presentation, you can submit them using the control panel's question tab. Now moving on to the topic of today's webinar. For successful product testing, your test teams need to be aligned with business criteria. This means having a clearly articulated definition of done that can be communicated with the testing teams. Now this may seem obvious, but it's still a challenge for many development teams. In this webinar, Svika Shahaf, Director of Product Management at Perforce Software, and Brajesh Deb, Principal Consultant at Infosys Netherlands and Enabler at the Test Chat, will be having an in-depth discussion on all things testing. Now to get things started, I'll turn it over to you, Vika.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Hi, Brajesh, and thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you so much, Vika. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, excited. I think exciting agenda we have today to cover.
Yes.
And I think that without further ado, we can jump into the opening question that I have for you. Brajesh, you know, so many things were said about the agile reality and how testing is impacting that. From your perspective, from your experience, and you know, meeting with so many customers and you know, testing teams around the world, can you share with us your perspective about what is really important with testing when you adopt agile methodologies? And you know, we see that this is really becoming a standard among different types of industries or verticals. Doesn't really matter if you develop software or hardware or both. We see that, you know, across the board. Can you give us some light of perspective from your side?
Sure, definitely. I think that's a very interesting and important question to address up front. Now, when we talk about testing, how important or how aligned is your testing with regards to the business? That's most important to understand. So when you are testing as a tester, how aligned are you to the business goals? How aligned is your strategy, your test strategy, to the business strategy? That is very important for us to understand. And that is where, you know, when we are talking about agile, we are talking about certain way of working. We are talking about, you know, working product increments, iterative development. But at all times, we need to keep this fact in sight, you know, always be on top of the game and say, okay, whatever we are doing, how is it benefiting the business? How is it going to solve the customer's problem? That is the most important question that we need to address. And as long as we are doing that, then I think we are on the right course.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. So just to complement that, recently, Brajesh, we ran some kind of a survey among, you know, Perforce customers and others that were, you know, really nice and willing to share with us their perspective and where they stand. And the question was mainly to try and understand how testing really aligns with the overall lifecycle management of the product. And again, we're trying to be here, you know, as generic as possible. It doesn't really matter what type of product you're developing. From a lifecycle management perspective, what is the role or the place of testing as part of your overall strategy? And we see here, you know, different levels of, I would say, maturity or implementation of testing in those, you know, that were really willing to share with us their perspective. And I'm interested, Brajesh, in your take about that. How do you see that, and how that reflects to you the state of testing, you know, as we speak of today?
Well, immediately there are a couple of colors that are, you know, grabbing my attention. You know, first of all, the red color which says we are using dedicated lifecycle management tool. I think that's a very important thing. At least they are aware that, okay, there is a journey that they have to take, and for that they have a certain tool which is helping them stay afloat and be on top of the game constantly. That number, in my opinion, needs to increase. Okay, so you need to have more and more clearly thought out goals which your lifecycle management tool needs to support. That is something that I think. Then another thing is the big 17% that we see, that unit testing and limited regression testing on a daily basis. I mean, if you do less of unit testing, then you will end up paying more price at the end, because the later that you test in your testing life cycle, the more expensive it is to fix defects. This is the very basic rule of testing, right? So that 17% definitely needs to go up. And that is my clear observation on this one. The other numbers are also interesting, but for the interest of time, let me stick to only these two. This is quite an interesting survey.
But my take from this survey, again, just to share my perspective and complement yours, Brijesh, and in many cases, we see that customers and organizations are in some kind of a journey towards a more advanced life cycle management, and testing be part of that. It's okay, there must be some kind of a starting point, and it's clear that the ideal and the end-to-end testing goal on the other side is also very important, and hopefully as part of their journey, as you say, British organizations understand that they need to start test earlier in the cycle to mitigate risk, to reduce significant quality problems that may occur throughout the process. But it's nice to see, and still I think that represent in a very nice way the real state in the market today, and the direction that organizations are going through as part of their journey. So
Absolutely.
With that, thank you. And with that said, I think that the next topic that we had for today, and is really one of the starting point, is really about business acceptance testing. Again, a lot has been said about this topic, and that the definitions are different from organizations, from one organization to another. What I wanted to try and spend some time with you today, Brijesh, is to get your perspective. Where do we start with it? Why do we need that? Just to give the audience some background on the importance of the BAT, of the business acceptance testing.
Well, as the term suggests, we are talking about business acceptance. You are building a product. You are trying to solve a problem for the customer, one problem or maybe more. Then obviously it has an impact on the business. So overall, it is important that whatever you do, like I said previously, is aligned to the business goals. Your strategy, your approach towards building that solution, your approach towards solving the problems, the way you get those requirements, do your analysis, and take it further and build the product. Everything has to be in line with the business. The business has to look at not just the product, but the overall process as well. So when you are talking about business acceptance testing, in my understanding, it has got a lot to do with your product testing, but also look at the business process validation also needs to be there. Where does the products fit into the entire life cycle, into the entire journey? What more can be done? Or what is it that needs to be probably eliminated, which is not really making an impact? Because quite often we see that there are products which are built but are not so frequently used. So that, is not something that a business would want. So it is important for the business to understand that. It is important for the stakeholders to validate and say, okay, you know what, guys, you're on the right path. Let's go with it. That's my initial thought.
Awesome. So just to complement from my perspective, I'm meeting with many customers, chatting about testing and the role of testing as part of the overall, lifecycle management. And one item that I recently kind of got from a couple of accounts is that the fact that they say that they have way too many test cases that they actually need in order to test their application. And I tried to ask them, why is that? What leads you to have so many test cases, test script? People are spending time to create those, to maintain them, to run them in the pipeline. And the notion was in many cases that there is some lack of understanding of the actual user journey of those applications that have been tested, or those products. So it basically means, and I think it's aligned with what you're saying, Brijesh, that testing really needs to have deep understanding of the business processes, the business journeys, if you like, of that solution that is being tested, whether it's an hardware component or a software component or something that combines both. In many cases, the tester needs to be really a true subject matter expert in that application or service that is being tested, so that the notion of, hey, this test isn't relevant to what we're trying to do, can happen. What's your take on that, Brijesh?
But you made a very interesting point there, Vikram. Now, one thing is to have too many test cases and to have that problem to solve that. And that's where I said, I mean, sometimes you end up writing tests which are not required, trying to test too much. That's also a problem. The other thing is, here in the definition that is there on the screen, we talk about making sure that you validate the requirements before you release the product to the market. Once the product is in the market, what is the response? Is it not a part of a business goal to make sure that the customer is actually happy, to collect that feedback quickly and to feed it into the system so that you are making improvements? So even after you release the product into the market, it should be good, or it should be quite interesting to ensure that your product is doing well. So it's not just before the release to the market, but also after the release to the market that the business acceptance testing should care about. So do you have your testing aligned with that thought? Is something really interesting.
And I would, and thank you for that, Brijesh. And I would address one question that raised from the audience. Avnish Narula is asking us, about what is our opinion about or view about regression testing on a daily basis, running things 24/7. So I think without knowing the exact details of the application under testing in your case, Avnish, my perspective is that testing should fit to the business cadence that you actually have, either during the development stage, or as Brijesh mentions, also if your app already has some touch in production. Yes, there is a true need to test everything every day, but in reality it's impossible because we don't have all the resources of doing that from a testing perspective, nor the time to run everything. Everything every day, as I've mentioned, is like the ideal of continuous testing. So in that case, my answer would be really to try and calculate that ROI that you actually get from testing. What is the business feedback that you get from testing that can make an impact? There is an impact that can be achieved from testing your application or service every day, and there are people that can consume that feedback. Yes, there is true justification from my perspective to test things on an ongoing basis. The other hand, as also Brijesh mentioned earlier, there is great advantage to test things early in the cycle and not just by the end of the cycle. So you have another layer of triaging of issues throughout the process and the ability to basically fail fast and fix fast before we get to the end of the sprint or the development cycle, and now we're kind of stuck with too many defects or issues that were identified. So just to wrap up the question, and again, thank you for that question, Avnish. if there is a business impact that can be achieved with testing on a daily basis, for sure, I would strongly recommend to implement, a testing cycle that can meet that.
Well, I'm just going to add. I'm just going to add two words to what Vika said, because your answer is very comprehensive. I'll just add two words to it: business value. Look for the business value of your tests. Do they have any additional benefit? What are you getting out of your regression tests? If it adds value to your testing, then go for it. Otherwise, don't do it. Don't do it for the sake of it. That's my only take.
And another, very valuable feedback that we get here from the audience, and guys, really appreciate your participation here, is coming from Shamal Kakit, that says that business acceptance testing will be done either by QA or by the business user product owner. That's the question. Who should own the business acceptance testing? In my perspective, the right answer would probably be both. The QA will drive the testing, but the KPIs and the definition, and we'll get to that. And that's a really good segue, to our next slide. The definitions or the KPIs, the ability to enforce those, are not solely coming just from the QA side. And Brijesh, maybe that's a good opportunity to answer Shamal's question. The difference between a good question and an excellent question is that you have, for the excellent one, a ready-made slide, and this is exactly where we're at. Your thoughts about how to define or enforce the business acceptance testing criteria?
Well, first of all, like I've been saying right from the word go, understand the business goals, align your testing with that. So acceptance criteria for the business. Okay, make sure that you understand them very well. What is it in the product that will add value to the product and will solve the customer's problem? So have your acceptance criteria defined according to that. And as far as enforcing them is concerned, well, I don't really like the term enforcing because it should come to the team involved automatically that, okay, this is what the business goal is. It's more about, instead of saying enforcing them, you could say aligning with them. That makes more sense because, once the entire team is aligned, then you know that you are going to build a successful product. And to just to the point that Shamal made in the question, who should be doing it? Well, the answer is very simple. Quality is everybody's responsibility, isn't it? So we cannot say that, okay, just the PO or the user or the tester should do it. Yes, you're talking about business acceptance testing. I understand that, okay, when you're talking about acceptance, you need somebody to actually own that and accept and say yes. So you will automatically start thinking about business users being the ones accepting it. But before that, if the entire team is aligned to the acceptance criteria, then right from the tester, everybody will have the same opinion about it. And that's where the alignment comes in. You do not need to enforce anything. You see that automatically things are in line and everything falls in place. I hope that answers Shamal's question.
So in my perspective, the most important thing, regardless of whether you're trying to create alignment or that you enforce different aspects, one of the important things is to build that process into your workflow.
Yes.
So it means that it's clear that roles and responsibilities throughout the life cycles are clear to everyone.
Absolutely.
It would make sense for the QA team to define some acceptance criteria and to follow those in testing. In other cases, maybe when safety is a critical issue, and we want to make sure that the product owner defines the acceptance criteria in writing as part of the requirement management module in that tool, and that QA can lead those testing KPIs or definitions as part of the process. That's a different workflow that makes sense. Really depends on
Perfect.
in which
Perfect.
environment?
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
perfect. Just to add, just to complement what you're saying, I think you made it very easy, Vika. I don't know if we lost you, but um, just to add to that, when we are talking about making the business acceptance criteria, when we are defining the criteria, if the team can be involved when the PO is defining the acceptance criteria, sitting with the stakeholders and defining, okay, this is what we are going to accept. These are the parameters that we're going to accept. Involve the team. It will make everybody's life easy. And like you said, it will then be a part of the workflow. So it becomes very easy. So absolutely, you've kind of nailed it with aligning it to the workflow. Yes.
And another comment that is important maybe to make here, and again, it falls to the same, question raised by Shamal here. I think that, another important area is to make sure that as part of that alignment, the requirements from testing are clear to everyone. It means that, we understand what we're testing and we're not having this kind of generic statement in the relevant issue or requirement set for that, features testing that says, check that the feature works. It has to be clear, crystal clear to everyone in a way that cannot be interpreted in different ways, and people may understand, different ways of testing that or accepting that feature based on a vague definition that may be there. When you open a bug to, to your IT department where you have an issue with your machine or server, you won't put a general statement in that ticket that says my server is on fire. You would specify that you have an issue with specific performance metrics, or that you have an issue with access, or things that are more clear to the person on the other side that can actually take that and turn it into an actionable item. And testing should be treated, under the same kind of perspective, where we all understand the business goal, but we translate that and turn that into clear definitions for, the testing team. And that leads us to those testing conditions, an important area that, that a lot of time is being spent, within the testing community to try and get better alignment on that. Brijesh, would you like to take us through that kind of consideration?
See, I think you've made a very valid remark before coming into this, which leads me into my point on this particular topic. So, most important consideration, in my opinion, and something that is spoken very little across the testing community, is testability. So, when you have the requirements, what is your perspective on the testability of those requirements? Okay, how testable are your requirements? You can't say that it has to work like magic, or the software needs to be fast enough, or such generic statements cannot be made. How testable are you making it? How specific are you with your requirements? Okay, so you have to articulate your conditions for testing, your requirements for testing very clearly. Okay, and that is the responsibility of the testers themselves to go and ask a lot of questions. When you see the requirements, or when you think about a product being built, what are the questions that come to your mind? In my opinion, as a starting point, some of the questions could be: number one, what is this product? Number two, what does it do? Number three, what problems does it solve? Number four, why does it do what it needs to be done? And number five is, how is it going to be implemented, and how will it be used? Who is going to use it is another important question. Sometimes you build a product only for a specific age group. What happens if somebody from outside that age group uses it? It becomes even more critical when it comes to safety critical applications. who is the one who is in charge? Who's going to make sure that this is functioning all the time, up and running, and the user is getting the benefit? What if there is a goof up happening somewhere? What if there is a security threat? So it is important to answer these very basic questions about every product. And most importantly, like I said, is the requirement testable? Is something that you need to ask. If it is not, then ask for clarification. So to articulating the testing conditions, very, very important. And for articulating them better, you need to ask a lot of questions. Is as simple as that.
Makes perfect sense to me, Brijesh. And one of the best practices that I kind of met in my career, and I see a lot among customers I'm sharing these kind of perspective with, is that you cannot write a test to a requirement that is not broken into the actual user stories. And
Correct.
that's from a product management perspective. You need to make sure that you articulate the user stories properly in your requirements. That is the only way for either product owners, as Shamal asked earlier, or for QA team members to translate those into actual, testing scenarios that covers, the business objectives that you were referring to earlier, Brijesh.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of times we are looking, we start thinking about test cases, too many, too less, or whatever. If you ask questions, a lot of those answers, or in fact, a lot of those questions would actually be your tests that you will actually need to run. Think about it. If it is, say for example, a pacemaker. Okay, we are talking about health care industry, and pacemaker is one of the most critical applications. Now, if you start asking questions, and if you ask, okay, what are the possible points of failure that we may have with this particular device? Okay, are they triggered by the software, or can those failures be triggered by hardware? Okay, what happens when you bring the software and the hardware together? So those will give you ideas to test. You know exactly where you may have something going wrong, and you can build your tests around it. So that's something really important to understand.
And it's a really good segue, to recap or summarize really the importance of having this alignment. My perspective, Brijesh, on that, and I'll be happy to get yours, is that when we close that loop, when we look at testing as something that should serve the business, the feedback that the testing team can provide back to the business based on the understanding of those acceptance criteria can be crucial. It will impact the user experience of that service. If we talk about digital applications, it may impact life that may be on the stake in other types of product that have safety and quality as something that we cannot compromise on, but only the ability to relay that quality feedback, that the ability to close that loop as part of the life cycle management and have everyone aligned with that, can build a healthy, mature, business process that includes or encapsulate testing as part of it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think you've said it a little earlier in the conversation that fail fast, fix fast is something really important for testers to understand. It is something really important for businesses to understand that when you see a failure, you don't get daunted by it. It is only an indication that you need to improve your product. So if you get a faster feedback saying that, hey, there is a problem, deal with it, so that the customer doesn't have to face it. Okay, and we are talking about applications which may be life-saving. In that situation, it becomes even more important. If you talk about space science, if you talk about those rockets where there is or these IoT devices where there is a convergence of software and hardware, how critical those small things become. You need to pay attention to those really small things, and that is where what you said, the idea of failing fast and fixing fast becomes really important, and it is perfectly aligned to the thought that you just presented.
But how do we know, Brijesh, that we actually fail or not in that early testing or in any type of testing that we do? The only way to do that, in my perspective, guys, is really through, the definition of done. And as we really enjoy your participation, we would love to hear your opinion as part of this short poll question that we bring in here, and would like, to share with you that poll question with our friends here at SD Time. Really, the question from our side to you guys is, what is the definition of done, and what place the definition of done takes as part of your testing today? Do you actually make sure that as part of any requirement that you have, there is a clear statement of how to test that feature on the one hand, or on the other hand, is that not fully kind of tight or strict, and leave room for some interpretation from your QA team side? Any thoughts on that, Brijesh, just to share with the audience while we're getting the feedback from everyone here?
Well, while we are building the product, if we do not test it, how is the building of that product complete? Is a question that I want to ask. So if the inclusion of testing as a part of your definition of done becomes very, very important. And as we see in the polls, some very interesting numbers. I was actually started to become very happy by seeing 0 against not at all, but that number is slowly increasing
Yeah.
and making me a little nervous. But
We
those are
appreciate really kind of honesty here. As you can see in the results, guys, almost 20%, indicate that they either have no definition of done or very little definition of done. Around 40% have that, not fully tight, but there is, some definition of done. And 40 additional percent say that they have completely covered the aspect of definition of done as part of the testing. Thoughts on that, Brijesh? Where does that?
This is like I said, a very interesting indication. Now, not having testing as a part of your definition of done is really inviting a lot of trouble, if I may say so, because when you are working on, it's very simple. Okay, if you are working on a product increment, okay, then you build it and you don't test it, and you say, okay, your work is done. How do you justify that? And would you use a product if you know that it was not tested before? Put yourself in the shoes of the customer. And like we were talking about, safety critical applications such as pacemakers or such as a space rocket. Okay, imagine that is not tested. Okay, you just build it and you just want to put a thing in space, a rocket. Try and ask Elon Musk, how does he feel about it? So, it is very important that you include testing as a part of your definition of done. If it is not there, then it is going to be very dangerous. So to those, I would say 60%, if you have it partially or somewhat or don't have at all, pay attention. Go back to your office tomorrow or wherever, even today after this, if you have the time, look at the definition of done and ask the product owner, hey, what is going on? Can you include testing as a part of this? So this should actually make you think. Okay, and if you are going to office tomorrow, think about it tonight, tomorrow morning when you go to your work, ask that question, investigate, and see what difference it's going to make. It's going to make everybody's life easy, I can tell you that.
I agree. I agree. And I was fortunate to go to the office this morning, and I'm here. And part of my day is having those meetings with other counterparts here at Perforce and discuss really about those things. And to make it really realistic, Brijesh, the definition of done is something that we should translate into behavior. That's like taking the business acceptance criteria that we've mentioned earlier and turning those into an expected behavior of that product. That allows the QA folks really to understand whether those conditions that we're specifying earlier are really fulfilled or not. And some examples may be that if we have a web application and we expect that page to be loaded, what is a reasonable page upload time that we expect to have? What is page load time that we expect to have, or what is the expected response that we should get when we conduct a specific action within a service or an application, or the behavior of a specific mechanical tool that should act based on a specific command or action that is being conducted. Those should be articulated in a very clear and I would say if someone interpret that in one way and another person understand a different perspective on the same requirement, we have an issue. Misalignment on testing conditions and definition of done may be that gap. So again, we're trying to be helpful here today and share with our audience really, the small things or the best practices that can help you guys start shaping your testing strategy to include these pieces. And my tip here would be to start with, kind of small wins. Let's take one feature, let's take one area of our product and see how we can polish or sharpen some of the definitions that we have in order to make sure that we eliminate those areas where very little or we don't have at all definitions of done for our testing teams. The test plan becomes really key to ensure as part of our life cycle management that we are progressing as expected and not leaving anything on the ground. Make sense, Bridget?
Absolutely. And I want to take it one more step forward. Okay, I want to bring in the perspective of automation. Now, automation plays a very important role, not just with regards to testing, but in making sure that your business goals are actually met. And one of the key things that all customers expect is a shorter time to market. And automation is a great way of enabling that. Now, in order for you to get your automation right, if you have a solid foundation and if you have clearly defined definition of done, then you will be able to make sure that your automation strategy is robust, and it allows you the room to experiment more with your automation and see what more areas that you can apply automation to. So while I completely agree with everything that you said, I would also like people to start thinking, hey, will a definition of done help me get better at doing things such as automation better? Now, earlier I spoke about testability. When we talk about automation, another aspect comes in, and that is automatability. And automatability is dependent on testability. And if you look at the big picture, you will see that at the heart of everything lies your definition of done. How clearly are you saying that, okay, this is the quality that I will accept as an end user? If you are able to touch your heart and say that, okay, this is what I accept and this is what I can consider it as done, only then I should be able to pass it on to my customers.
Yeah.
So that is very important. Yeah.
And that leads me really, Brijesh, to tying it back to test management. So, test management is a term that we all know for a couple of decades now. But in an agile reality, there are different areas of focus or different things that we need to pay attention to. We talked about the requirements earlier, Brijesh. We talked about how it is important to articulate the business acceptance testing, criterias and turn them into test cases, and of course also to be able then to run those, to execute those, throughout the life cycle of our product. Can you help us really understand how does that align with our workflow in an agile reality? Why this is becoming so important?
Well, if you look at the projects in the modern day, there is a lot of agile, there is a lot of DevOps. And if you talk to people, they say, hey, we don't need a test manager. We don't need test management. We are good with it. We are a self-organizing, cross-functional team, and we are good without specific testing practices such as test management. This is the statement you will hear from a lot of managers. But if you look deep inside the projects, you will see that when you are doing testing, you need somebody to be in charge, somebody to be able to guide, somebody to be able to mentor the people who are involved in testing. Your testing team may comprise of people with different experience levels. Okay, and for them to get aligned to the business goals that we have been talking about, to understand the intricacies of the definition of done that we have been talking about, you need somebody to walk with them step by step. And for that, you need test management. And test management is a little more than what is written on the slide. It is from a requirement to a test case to a test execution to a product that is being delivered to the customer. So it is a complete cycle going absolutely starting from your requirement going all the way up to the customer. So if you think that test management is just about updating Jira or doing something like that, well, I'm afraid you will have to go back and look at your test management practices a little deeply to understand how you can improve.
So a couple of weeks ago, Brijesh, I met with an organization, fairly large organization in the financial services space, and I got some kind of understanding that it's really hard to be able to meet different agile aspects as part of your lifecycle management when you're not adopting a test management way of thinking. Before we even talk about products that support that, one thing that was clear to me that when you manage business goals, and this organization really translate financial actions in that product into requirements. So different business goals are being translated in their way of managing requirements into goals. And those goals may be tested in different ways, but there is no centralized way of understanding where are we in terms of testing those business goals, and beyond that also the ability, of course, to take any release decision, that classic go no go decision that we all know. So the way that is implemented is like using spreadsheets and multiple analysts that are helping to gather everything. But when I was trying to discuss with the person, the manager that was responsible for the process, and ask like, do you know in real time where you're at in your testing journey? Let's say within this specific sprint, will you be ready to release in like today, tomorrow, or any other time? And the question in majority of cases was, I need to get back to you. I need to collect the data first, because there is no automated process or effective process. Let's put automation aside for a sec. Effective process of data flow that allow us to understand where we're at, better understand the coverage, or trace different things throughout the process. The important piece and advice that I can give the audience here today around that piece is, let's think together and tie that back to that workflow where we define the requirements and the issues. How do we tie specific test cases? And just doing that through an issue management tool, it's a nice to have thing, but you don't really tie enough to the testing environment, to the ability to consume result back, to control, everything that is running through your testing cycle. For sure, any manual testing activity or business testing that happens in many cases in separate silo. So think about test management as something that is like an enabler, not liability. It allows you to get better value of testing, get better visibility of testing. I hope that you would agree with that, Rajesh.
Yes, completely agree. And you mentioned a very important word in what you're trying to explain. That is silo. And that is the problem with a lot of teams. They operate in silo, they want to excel in silo. And what test management allows you is to remove that silo and bring everybody on the same page. Because ultimately, it's about the business being successful. And if you want that to happen, then you would want your teams to come together. So I get it, okay? In today's world, decentralization is a big thing. Everybody wants to be in charge of their stuff. If you look around, you will see a lot of blockchain, a lot of agile, a lot of DevOps. That teams are doing things. They feel that they are in control when they can see it happening. But at all times, try and look at the big picture. Does it fit your context? Again, going back to the safety critical applications. I keep going back to those applications because, quite often we look at, our projects, maybe certain websites. We think, okay, oh, what difference does it make? Maybe your website is not making much of a difference. But imagine the same thing. Imagine you doing testing for a healthcare company, for a financial, for a fintech, okay, where, a small mistake can cost you millions. Imagine that happening, okay? And that's where you need to start thinking that, okay, these small teams, while they are trying to achieve their best in trying to get their piece of working increment out in the market, what happens when it comes together? Is there somebody who is eliminating the boundaries and bringing us all together? And that is where test management actually comes in and is critical. So yeah, I get it. Agile, you don't need test managers, but you need test managers.
Fair enough. So I think that, the conclusion here is that there are pieces from the good old test management that we all know that are maybe less relevant in an agile reality. But on the other hand, agile reality really flashes some areas, especially the scale, the velocity that we have, the amount of data that we need to control, and so many departments or areas of testing that happens that requires us to rethink about the term of test management and see what is the value that we can actually get out of that. And one of these value points, and we're getting some great questions from the audience, and we'll try to address some of these in a moment, but we would love, to kind of share another question with you, which is closer to the traceability space. And that's another poll question that we would really love to open to our audience at this point. What is and we're trying now to tie all the pieces together. And what is really the level of product definition of done that you enforce as part of your test cases? Are you really linking any new requirement to a set of test cases to make sure that the feature that you are working on or the product that you're working on is fully tested as part of that workflow? Is that part of your actual kind of life cycle management, and that you have those control points or the ability to track the progress and the health of a specific functionality throughout the life cycle? Any thoughts on that while we're gathering the feedback from our audience, Brijesh?
Yes. So, again, just like testability, traceability is a topic which is very less spoken about within, if you go to conferences and if you talk to people. Uh, Traceability, in a pre-agile world was a very interesting thing because everybody used to think from, from an end-to-end perspective. And that's where people used to think, okay, so I have requirements from there. I need to get a link to my test cases and from there to my defects and so on and so forth, so that if something goes wrong, then I know exactly which requirement I was testing and what I need to fix. Now, if it was true in the pre-agile world, why is it not true now? Is a question that I would ask. In my opinion, it still is very much true. And you see that the numbers are indicating that. And still you would see that the poll
Yeah.
numbers will tell you that there needs to be a lot of improvement. There needs to be a lot of focus that needs to be brought in so that you are able to, um, build a better
Agreed.
product.
And I think that, one of the transformations that traceability has to go through in an agile reality is really the aspect of coverage.
Yes.
That's the important question that we hear more and more from, organizations that, we're kind of meeting with. Testing requirement coverage in an agile reality is, very close into that good old traceability model that we used to have in a pre-agile world, or that is enforced in many areas that are heavily regulated and need to comply with specific, kind of standards. But on the other hand, if you're a software shop and you release, say, a mobile application, a banking mobile application, or any other, solution that you have, and you just want to make sure that from a coverage perspective, your application is rendering properly across multiple platforms during testing. That is, the kind of the testing requirement coverage that you have. The only way to manage that is to tie it back to that requirement, even if it stays as a Jira ticket that you have somewhere that says tested against 15 different platforms, or any other, type of coverage idea that we may have here. The need really to reshape traceability into today's, um, agile methodology implementation in many organizations, is really indicated in this question. And again, thank you for everyone who participated in this, quick poll question and sharing your thoughts. We definitely see that you guys are on your way there, but there is still some work to do in tying, what we talked earlier about, starting with the business acceptance testing criterias into that definition of done and baking that into your workflow so that, the visibility that we're getting on every cycle is solid enough. We feel that we are working on solid foundation that is based on, the terms that we have discussed today. And to tie everything together before we open things to last question, it's really about the value that you're getting out of it. Brijesh, when we talk about the place for test management, it will usually be, around the need to either mitigate risk related to quality or to velocity, or to basically try and combine both. And I would really appreciate your kind of closing remarks around how can the new breed of test management, or implementing pieces of test management that are aligned with, the agile methodology, can really help us, save time, mitigate any risk that is related to release, while not compromising on quality.
Well, so when we talk about coverage, are we talking about just the requirements, or are we talking about something a little more than that? That is something really important to understand. In my opinion, coverage is requirements coverage plus risk coverage. So are you thinking about the risks that you have, and through your tests, covering the mitigation for those risks? Do your tests do that? If not, then you will need to go back and look back at your testing. And that is where, test management will actually help you. That is where traceability will help you. That is where your definition of done will help you. If you look at it very closely, testing is in a big way managing your risks so that you see it before the customer sees it, and you eliminate it by making that fix. So again, going back to the point that you made, fail fast, fix fast. And people look at fail fast and they're like, why do you want me to fail? No, we don't want you to fail. We want you to make sure that you have encountered the risk before the customer did, so that we are able to fix it. And that will give you a stronger sense of coverage, a greater sense of control, a better sense of the product having higher quality. That is what I have to say about it.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for that, Brijesh. Folks, we're trying today to open, some important questions related to your testing strategy, as part of the agile reality that you're at, whether you're deep into the implementation of agile methodologies or whether you're, at the beginning of that journey. The purpose was really to encourage you guys to look inside into the strategy that you're implementing and thinking about ways to optimize it, different angles or perspectives on, some of the important pieces that tie testing into that process, with the great help of Brijesh, that really has a very broad kind of industry perspective, and speak with many testing organizations around the world. Really great just to your time. And I think that we have a moment for one or two additional questions. Jenna, before we open it to additional questions from the audience, one that we got on the chat.
There is one.
Yeah,
there is one that I see, and that is again from Avnish. And he's asking, I am a scrum master of a team which works with installation tests, end-to-end tests, and so on. Do you have any advice for the initial few months? Pika, I want you to take this one first, and then I will talk about it.
With pleasure. So, the first thing that I would do, and trying to follow some of the script that we're trying to build for this presentation today, think about the business objectives, Avnish. Think about what are you trying to achieve with your testing, whether it's the installation testing that you're talking about or the end-to-end test, and so on. And think on how the testing can complement business decisions. How can you define those acceptance criteria and definition of done with your testing? Once you have that piece, clear, and you know what exactly you want to achieve with testing, then the question becomes on how can I build a test plan that can actually meet that? And do I have the tools? Do I have the supporting environment to do that? Do I have so many moving parts that I cannot control that, and I need a tool that would help me manage testing better? Or am I handling it at this point and thinking about the future? But one of the things with picking tools is always thinking about the next play, not just where we're at. And it's okay. And my take, Avnish, would be it's great to think about, a short-term strategy. But when you build one and you're setting the right foundation, it is being set, to scale, because that's what Agile brings in, the scale and the velocity and the coverage perspective. So I would definitely think about the short term, build an immediate plan, but would also keep in mind the mid to long term strategy that is related to testing, because at some point this thing needs to grow up when the business succeeds and grows.
Yeah, and just to add to what Vika said, in the initial days, in the initial few months, talk to people, collaborate with your product owner, collaborate with your developers, your architects, your fellow testers. Understand what perspective they have, what sort of thoughts they have around the risks, what are they thinking in terms of alignment with business. If you bring everybody on the same page, like we have been saying right from the word go, are your thoughts aligned to the business? Are you exactly doing what is required to be done in order to solve the customer's problem? Start thinking about that. And that will get you started, Avnish. It will give you a great foundation, like Vika said. It will give you a great foundation to build your testing upon. And I'm sure you will have a lot of success.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So thank you for that feedback. Jenna, maybe we have time for one more question. I know that we're at time, but really, a great opportunity and such an important feedback from the audience. So while having Brijesh here, maybe one more question before we close it.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the great questions. There's one in the chat from Ralph that says, I've seen many test management systems that are separated from requirements. How do you align the tests and test results with the requirements and specifications?
How do you align the tests and test results with the requirements? Okay, again, it all boils down to first of all aligning with the business goals first as a first step. Okay, and then once you are aligned to the business goals, once you look at the requirements and say, okay, this is what is expected out of me, this is what is expected as a business objective, then I need to start building my test cases which exactly look at the requirements which are there. And a short while ago, Vika mentioned the importance of traceability. So make sure that you build in that traceability, from your test cases to all the way up to your business objectives. That is where the alignment will automatically come. So that is where, the things that we just touched upon, definition of run, traceability, test management, all three of those will give you the required results. I hope that answers your question, Ralph. Or Vika, you want to add something?
I would add one word, and it's linking. Think always about the easy way to build those bridges, between a requirement or any other business objective that you have, and how do you link that to a test? How a test can qualify or disqualify that. It's all about the linking. If you build those properly and you use the right, acceptance criteria, you're all set. You won't have issue to articulate that. And as Brijesh mentioned, talk with your business counterparts. Break it down, build it together into some actionable testing plan, and that is really the path towards building that traceability and the ability to manage testing properly in today's agile reality.
Great. Hopefully that answered your question, Ralph. Thanks both for a great presentation. And thanks to Perforce for sponsoring today's webinar, as well as all of you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Jenna Sargent.
Thank you.